Now let's take a look at a general overview of needles. Several things you want to know about needles. The first thing you want to know about a needle is the needle that you're going to use in this machine is generally going to be a style called a DBXK5. That is going to define the size of the shank, the diameter of it, the length of the needle, and the size of the eye, so that it fits inside this machine. Now, the DB is a slightly larger eye. The machine itself comes with a DXK5, which has a slightly smaller eye. We prefer the ones with the little bit larger eye, so when we replace them with the DB XK5s. Another thing you want to realize about needles, besides the style, is if we take a look here, you'll notice there's a gold one. That is a titanium needle. Okay, when it's going through the fabric, it doesn't bend as easily, as well as the fact that it will last longer. Next to that is this gray colored one, and that one has a coating on it, and we call that a cool sewn needle. And what we use that for is it slides through materials with less friction. A needle like that is great for sewing things like a polyester webbing, like a dog collar, where it's a very thick, dense nylon or polyester, and as the needle goes through it, it has a tendency to heat up. With this coating on there, it makes it so that needle doesn't heat up and it sews better. Your titanium needle can be used on anything if you want the needle that's going to have less bending, less what we call deflection, and to last longer. And then of course the one at the end here, the silver one, that is your standard steel needle, which is the most common. It's the least expensive, the most common, and that's what you'll see come standard with the machine. Now, besides needles being made out of different materials, another thing that's important to see, and if we take a close look up at a package, down at the bottom here, this one says FFG, and if I take another one, for example this one, this one says RG. Now the difference is in the point. An RG needle is what we call a sharp point needle. It is a cutting needle. We typically use that on woven materials. The ones that say FFG are what we call ballpoint needles, and that's what we typically use on knits. And the reason why is because knits are made of one continuous strand of material. So when you're sewing, if you happen to put a hole in that, it continues to unravel until we stop it from unraveling, just like a sweater. So we don't want to take the chance of doing that, which is why we typically use a ballpoint needle on knits. For wovens, we're not worried about that. It's made of all individual strands woven together, and we generally use a sharp point needle. On things like ball caps, we use sharp point needles. Now, besides needles having different points and the style, they also come in different sizes. Okay? And you've got a European measurement and a domestic measurement. The higher the number, the thicker the needle. Typically, day in and day out, for sewing shirts and sweatshirts and things of that nature, we generally use a size 75/11. When it comes to sewing some of our new tech materials, we might use a slightly thinner needle. We might use a size 70/10. And when it comes to sewing delicate materials, or if we want to get stitches close together, or very fine detail, extremely short, tight stitches, we would use a size 65-9 type needle. And if we're sewing on heavier materials, Carhartt jackets, some heavy ball caps, we want to make sure that the needle doesn't bend. So we would use a 90-14 or an 80-12. What we're controlling here is the amount of bending the needle does. Okay, by using a thicker needle, the needle's not going to bend as easily. Now, if you take a look at this, you'll notice on this Gross-Beckert package, up top here, the label is gold in color. And if I hold one of these up, you just have the standard green writing. These are your standard needles, and the gold one are your titanium needles. And that's an overview of needles. Let's take a look at the anatomy of a needle. Okay, up at the top here, the part that goes in the machine, that is referred to as the shank. Down at the lower part here, the main part, that's the shaft of the needle. Along the front edge, you've got this channel, that's called the thread groove. Then you have the eye of the needle, and if you turn the needle to the back, you've got this little half moon cutout right here, and that's called the sharf. You need to make sure that when you put the needle in the machine, the sharf is facing towards the back of the machine. Now, everybody thinks the point of the needle is what wears out. Typically, the point of the needle does not wear out. What generally wears out is actually the eye of the needle. So the way we know it's time to change needles is we start breaking thread, and it's time to change a needle. Now, there are a couple other points that are available that are not as common as sharp point and ball point, and that would be a wedge point or what we call a tri-point or a chisel point, and that's used for sewing leathers. Now, we're going to take a look at a large-scale replica of the bottom part of the needle. You'll notice this groove, that would be down the front. That's the thread groove. Here's the eye of the needle. And then if we flip this around, from the side you can clearly see this half moon cutout. That's the sharf. And this one is created with the rounded off point instead of the sharp point. This would be what a ball point looks like.